Chapter 5. When sleep claimed her at long last, Meiling rose out of her body with profound relief. She hesitated only a moment, hovering in the darkness of her room long after the last light of day had faded. Then, shooting like a fire star, she tore through her window into the sky. There were things she needed to do tonight, but first, she soared through the streets of Suguan, surrounded by the cacophony of the stars overhead. "I missed you all too," Meiling told them with a smile. Though they were the same stars that had traveled with her long and far, it felt different when they sparkled over her home. Here, she could almost believe she'd never left. She flew past flickering torchlight and the dying din of people in the streets finalizing their preparations for the Festival of New Lights. She could have exploded from the bursting emotion of these familiar sights. Meiling hurried onward, and her gaze snagged on her destination, looming high overhead. "Almost there," she whispered with a sudden surging of longing. One last burst of speed, and she reached her favorite cliff overlooking the moonlit ocean. She paused as whitecaps bobbed below her, and the grass waved under the cold night wind. She slid down into a puddle on the grass. Flinging shadow legs over the edge of the cliff, she leaned forward and stared out at the far reaches of the ocean. "I'm home," she said, with a sigh that sent her soul sinking to the ground. Home. In some ways, home was the most terrifying place to be. Meiling had not wandered the academy at night for a very long time. She'd had this irrational fear of being discovered by so many magic wielders in one place. Tonight, it was bright with multicolored glows shining out of windows. It was a large complex, and depending on which measurement was used, could be considered larger than the palace. The buildings created a crescent moon shape around the training grounds, with the gardens behind the buildings. No one practiced so late at night, as they always did their training first thing in the morning. Instead, the students still awake must be the ones with their noses glued to parchments and inkwells and books. The students studying for their exams. A memory that she had seen in Feiyen's head flashed across her mind. One of Feiyen and Shang studying together silently in one of the libraries by candlelight. The night Feiyen had tried to kiss Shang, only to have him storm away in anger, books bundled under his arms. Was Shang still awake at this hour? It must be long past midnight. It was a wonder that any of the students remained awake. What about Feiyen? If she searched in the libraries, would she find her friend half asleep after a full day of healing, trying to catch up on her studies? Meiling lowered herself out of the air, nearer to the ground. One of the multi-leveled buildings with pristine red paint seemed to glow brighter than the other buildings. She floated forward, trailing dissolving spirit behind her. When she reached a window, she tried to look through it and ended up melting through the wall unintentionally. Startled, she pulled herself back. She floated near a long hallway. When she came closer, glancing this way and that, she found it divided into two long stretches of dormitories. Within the thin paper walls, dozens of sleeping souls glowed the colors of the rainbow. Backing away slowly, she flitted through the walls again until she flew suspended in the air above the training grounds. Something familiar caught in the corner of her vision, and she whirled at the sight of an ice-blue glow. She was not fast enough. That ice-blue glow disappeared through a door just as she turned its way. Growling soundlessly, she flew forward to the building on the far side, where she had seen Shang enter. When she burst through the walls after him, she wheeled to a stop. Before her, in a surprisingly opulent and spacious Academy Master's chamber, Shang sat on one side of a desk, engaging in a quiet but forceful conversation with an older man in black master robes that matched Shang's. The ice-blue glow emanating from Shang's soul mingled with the golden glow of the master. Some brand of feral magic, then.
"We have forces at these checkpoints along the route to Suguan,"
said the master, pointing at the map spread between them.
"At least when Fang moves, we'll know. They'll send messengers."
Shang shook his head.
"Fang knows about the checkpoints. He could— How does he know? These aren't public knowledge."
Meiling's heart dropped, and she hung back against the wall, dread washing over her like water. She'd uncovered that knowledge in his mind. Because of her—
"He knows because I knew,"
Shang said, voice hard as ever.
"He took the information from my mind."
The master cursed viciously, shaking his head.
"This isn't going to help your trial."
Shang's soul glow pulsed as his brow narrowed.
"Forget the trial. There are bigger concerns here. What if Fang takes the checkpoints before they have a chance to light the signal fires? Then we won't know when he's advancing. He could be at our doorstep before we ever knew he'd left Butagan. He could be halfway here already. You need to take this to your former colleagues in the strategist department. If they're not ready, I can't tell them this information without jeopardizing your trial and piling evidence against you. They'll want to know how you know classified information. They'll blame the loss of our warriors' lives on you. They'll see it as your failure to get the princess to Liafugan that led to the events of your capture and Fang getting a hold of the classified information you shouldn't have known. Shangdi, you'll be condemned before week's end."
The master spewed the words out in one breath, holding out his upturned hands as though pleading with him. Meiling pressed a hand to her chest as she sank lower and lower toward the ground. She'd known the situation was bad, but she hadn't realized the full extent of disaster. Even now, when his life and empire were on the line, he still protected her, still guarded her secret. Shang, oblivious to her presence, leaned forward, planting his large, square hand flat on the map. He enunciated each word carefully, his mouth set like flint.
"Tell them. Anyway." "Shangdi, I don't care,"
Shang snapped.
"The trial doesn't matter. Junning Hai matters. The people in this city matter. If you care about my life, then help me get this information to the people who have the power to do something with it. Because Fang is coming. He will sack this city. And he knows me. If I am still alive when he comes, he will hunt me down and kill me, in a way that would make any Junning Hai execution look pleasant. This conquest of his is about settling scores, and he has a score to settle with me."
He didn't even know how right he was. Zedong never forgave. If Meiling was in her body, she might have thrown up. The blazing force of Shang's will clashed with the master's own will, their gazes locked and unfaltering. At last, the master sighed and ran a hand over his shaved head.
"At least it seems like the Emperor is on your side. He did not have to give you a trial, you know."
He shook his head.
"That Hu Fen, I told them, she's too careless. She is strong and talented and always worked hard. But I knew from when she was a mere toddling babe she did not have the attention to detail nor a full scope of understanding to succeed in a setting like that. She's powerful, they said. What could go wrong if she was paired with you to balance out her fire? Humph! I could have picked 1 or 2 partners for you that would have made the difference between success and failure for this mission. But do they care about my opinion? Absolutely not."
Shang said nothing.
"And now you, my brightest student in years, are paying the price."
The master continued shaking his head. His forehead wrinkled more with each shake.
"Bureaucracy is a mess wherever you go."
Meiling's tether burned with anger. She stayed where she was, in the corner, watching the two of them at the low table, but she couldn't help the fury coursing through her. Good wielders like Shang shouldn't have to pay the price for bureaucracy being a mess. Strong, principled, brilliant wielders like Shang shouldn't have to die via execution while giving their all to save their empire. It was wrong, and she wasn't going to stand by and let it happen. The master rose, revealing that his robes were ever so slightly too long on his short frame. He walked around the table to where Shang stood. They faced each other for a long moment, Shang mostly expressionless, and the master with a tight jaw, before the master reached out and embraced him. Meiling jerked back again, and this time did pass through the wall into the darkness outside. Quickly, she floated back through in time to see Shang return the affection.
I will plead on your behalf for a miracle. Perhaps the fathers will be merciful,
the master said, pulling away swiftly and returning to where he had been sitting before.
Get some sleep before tomorrow.
Shang bowed.
I am in your debt.
The master waved his hand dismissively, and Shang strode out of the room. Meiling hurried after him, but kept her distance as trepidation thumped through her spirit like a heartbeat. Ahead, the wind caught on the long strands of his black hair and blew them away from his face. He walked purposefully by the light of the sconces, not knowing everything around him was illuminated in white-blue light. As much as she wanted to continue following him, she'd invaded his privacy enough tonight. Tempting as it would be to slip into his mind, to read whatever thoughts floated through his mind, she didn't want to wield her magic, her power, that way. It wasn't for satiating her curiosity, or even for dulling the ache of missing him. She stayed where she was, floating on the covered portico as his glow grew more distant and less vibrant, and finally as it disappeared behind the resounding thud of a wooden door. One thing was certain. Shang didn't intend to win this trial. Which meant if there was any hope of a pardon for him and Fen, Meiling had to be the one to fight for it. She turned on her heel and flew back the way she'd come. She planted herself on her favorite cliff overlooking the starry sky as it met the ocean's edge to think of exactly how she'd go about trying to save Shang and Fen.
When Shang settled into his temporary private chamber at the academy, he was surprised to find he already had a missive waiting for him from his father. He'd spent hours with Master Deng, discussing the movements of Feng's troops. They'd been interrupted by Master Deng's regular class schedule, during which Shang presented himself to the headmaster for duty. The headmaster had an expression that communicated, without words, exactly how strange he thought this arrangement was. It's even stranger than you think, part of Shang wanted to remark. It was back to Master Deng's office after that. By the time Shang pushed open his door and lit a few candles, the sun had been set for hours. The room wasn't much. A cot to one side, a low desk to the other, a basin for washing, and shelves along the far wall. It was still far more space than he was used to having at the academy, so he should be glad for it. Instead, he missed the comforting sounds of Zhenshu readying for sleep, and the crackle of a fire out in the middle of the wilderness when Meiling had always been nearby. Zhenshu might be dead. He tried not to think about it. He doubted he could handle a loss like that any better than he handled Meiling's almost loss. If he'd known in advance that Zhenshu was in that dungeon with him, he could have thought of an escape that involved him. He could have freed Zhenshu first before he even went to wake Meiling. But by the time he'd known about his friend, it was too late to change plans. All they knew about Feng's fortress was that it had been sacked just a few days after he'd gotten Meiling out. Feng had fled with his forces. No word had come of survivors or casualties, either from dungeon prisoners or Zhenninghai's attacking forces. He had no idea when he would learn if Zhenshu made it. Shang eyed the letter, his name written in his father's precise script. He didn't really want to open it. Fathers knew he had enough things to worry about as it was, With a tight exhale, he flicked his finger, coating it in long, razor-sharp ice, and sliced open the seal. He skimmed it, discarding the subtle barbs and passive-aggressive comments about how well Shang had better do in his new appointment, until he found the important part. His stomach sank. Arrangements are underway for your marriage. It took me some time to dig into her lineage, to ensure the strength of the ice magic, but the young lady is nearly a purebred ice wielder. One of her elder sisters is married to a feral wielder in the secret services. So even though they are not especially noble, it is still a reputable match that will preserve the bloodline and elevate the Tan line. Negotiations are in progress, and I will take care of everything. You need only to show up for the wedding once we've set a date. The Shang from hardly a few months ago wouldn't have hesitated. He would have nodded and said, "Yes, father." He wouldn't have cared. This had always been the plan. He held the corner of the parchment in the flame of the nearest candle and watched as flames licked over the words and devoured them whole. "There is only one woman I would take for a wife," he muttered under his breath. "And she sure isn't a Qilin cursed ice wielder." His vision blurred along the edges, a reminder that he was long overdue for rest. It would be an early morning and a long day tomorrow, but maybe he would postpone writing back to his father, just until after he'd slept, so he could think carefully about how to respond instead of acting rashly. He prepared for sleep, and it was the mundane motions that allowed space for thoughts of her to invade his mind. Was she asleep now? Did she fly around the palace or the night sky at this very moment? She had such immense power. Power he knew exactly how to wield to accomplish his goals. With magic like hers, he could have traded in secrets to lie, steal, and manipulate his way to being emperor. But she was probably using it to admire the stars. For the first time in hours, Shang's lips lifted in a small smile. And that was why he would hazard everything he'd spent his life pursuing for her.
Chapter 6. Meiling moved slowly to not upset the headdress fastened with 1,000 pins into her hair. Her heartbeat was unusually fast this morning as her maids dressed her in white robes printed with blue flowers and fastened a gold sash around her waist. Now, whenever she moved her head, crystal beads rattled and swung. She had much practice wearing such ornaments, but today seemed unusually tall and made her feel like if she cocked her head the slightest bit, the whole thing would come tumbling down. Paint covered her face. Not so much as Ma's, but it was probably enough for 12 princesses to be sufficiently decorated. If she smiled too wide, as was expected at festivals, it flaked around her cheeks and the corners of her eyes. She dismissed her servants and stood for a minute longer in her chamber. "Just smile," she whispered to herself, as she tried not to fiddle with her sleeves or the hem of her sash. "That is all. It does not matter what they think of you." Taking in a deep breath, as if the air itself could give her courage, she opened her door and stepped out into the hallway. Her maids were waiting, accompanied by 2 guards. Together, she and her entourage paraded down to the lower levels of the palace, where her family would ride through the city streets, welcoming the festival. When they reached the lines of fidgeting horses outside, Meiling forced a smile and turned to find her family. They stood nearby, similarly adorned. Gone were Hao and Yun's white academy uniforms. Hao looked even less comfortable than Meiling, but her head was suspiciously barren of ornaments. That must be why she smirked. Ma wore white with gold brocade and a headdress twice the size of Meiling's. She smiled slightly at something Pa said and managed to make climbing into a litter look graceful. No one would suspect she had been screaming and thrashing last night. Before the curtain was pulled closed, however, she glanced out and saw Meiling. Instantly, her eyes clouded and her lips parted. Something was wrong. Pa stepped in after her. Meiling pressed a hand to her stomach, attempting to settle its sudden roiling. Ma saw something horrible. It didn't mean it would happen, only that it could. But she appeared to have no intention of telling Meiling. She probably didn't want Meiling to worry. She wanted her to rest instead. It only made her worry more. She stared at the back of the litter until a footman bowed in front of her. She raked her attention away from the knots of dread filling her. Right now, she needed to focus on getting through this parade without humiliating her father. Later, she would worry about everything else.
"May I assist, Your Highness?"
The footman asked, gesturing toward a black horse's saddle not far behind her parents' litter. At the sound of rattling beads and the shifting weight on her head, her hand darted up to touch her headdress. It is fine, she told herself. Wild stallions could not rip it off her head. Hopefully. It only felt like it was going to fall off. Yes, thank you, she managed. She tried not to think of Shang when the footman bent to offer his hands for her foot. Tried not to think of his tall frame as the footman tucked her shoe into the stirrup. Instead, she twisted to look behind her as Hal was helped in her saddle. I can mount a horse just fine, she growled.
"It's a little tall, Highness."
Nonsense. The stars and sun and moon could not keep Hal from doing what she wanted to do. With strength that belied her short, twig-like frame, she heaved herself up into the saddle with a face that seemed to say, "Watch me." There was no need to inform Hal of Meiling's own struggles to mount. The thought made her simultaneously want to blush and chuckle. Let Hal think Meiling only accepted the help to be the dignified lady she was. Ewan rode ahead of her. His posture, back ramrod straight, shoulders wide, reminded her so much of Pa. He looked like Pa, too, though not quite so tall and wiry where Pa was burly. Shortly, all was deemed ready. The horns blared, the gate opened, and together they rode out to take their place in the parade. Mounted guards surrounded her and her family. 2 members of the Emperor's Guard flanked her, and she spared a prayer for Tao Zhenshu's safety. Once they eased into their place in the parade, Meiling looked backward, cognizant of her headdress, and found horses and people for what seemed to be dozens of li. Where was the end? She could not find the beginning either. Not for the first time, Meiling wished she could be a regular person in the crowd, free to delight in the parade's entirety, rather than experience only the tiny bit she was part of. Somewhere in the line would be men on stilts, fire breathers, the dragon dance, and beautiful, exciting music. Their entrance into the streets of Suguan marked the beginning of the Festival of New Lights, and the roar of the people welcomed them. Meiling shoved her lips up in a smile as they rounded the bend. The street crested before descending into the main thoroughfare of the city. Her horse clip-clopped at its leisurely pace, making her sway with the motion. A gust of chilly wind sent her heart leaping and her hand flinching to brace her headdress. Just in time, she stopped herself from reaching for it. A sea of people stretched as far as she could see. The sight of so many cheering people and the power of their uproar took her breath away, like always. Gooseflesh rose on her arms, and she nearly forgot to smile. Another step, and they plunged into the midst of the people. Her breathing went shallow in awe. Their energy and thrill for the festival was contagious, and she found her smile growing more and more natural. People garbed in their finest, most colorful clothing flung themselves to the cobblestones before the royal family. It was the first day of the festival, which meant people were here for more than celebrating. They shoved themselves forward from the back, and the shouting became discernible words. "Bless my daughter's marriage!"
Bless my son's match!
Hands were raised and flailing toward her family. The guards on foot grimaced as they fought against the swell of people seeking a blessing. Yoon reached out 2 fingers and began pointing at people as they passed. Once they were blessed, the people fell to their knees and bowed in gratitude. Such a simple thing, and yet it made Yoon seem the most benevolent crown prince. Ma and Pa were doing the same thing, and if Meiling turned, she knew she'd find Hao stretching her fingers out, tapping the air. Meiling's hands, however, stayed in the saddle, clutching the reins. She fought to keep her smile from faltering. A woman burst through the guards and fell precariously close to the hooves of Yoon's horse. "Bless my son's marriage, Crown Prince!" she shouted, prostrate on the ground. It was too loud, and Yoon's head was turned in the other direction. He did not see or hear the woman, and his horse passed her by. Meiling nibbled her lip, watching the woman cry and reach out toward Yoon. She was obviously poor by the state of her garments, and this was likely the only chance the woman had for a blessing. Despair overtook her face as the guards pushed the woman back into the crowd. Meiling's 2 fingers twitched. She wasn't cursed, even if everyone thought she was. Besides, those who danced around her shadow were those of high rank and birth. This woman was a commoner. It would be easier just to let the woman be forgotten. Just like Meiling had always been forgotten. Coming to a decision, she met the woman's gaze and reached out her fingers. "May your son be blessed." The woman's eyes went wide in horror. "She's cursed my son!" Her shriek turned into a wordless wail of mourning. Meiling drew back as though stung. It had always been silent. She had felt it, but never had she been publicly called disgraced, shamed, or humiliated. It was unspoken, tangible and real, but never this real. Commotion formed around the woman until the guards lining the streets escorted her away from the street as she wept. There were a few shouts, and someone was knocked to their knees as confusion mounted. More guards dispatched to restore the peace, but nothing could ease the sudden tumult of her stomach. She rode past the scene and tore her eyes away, facing forward with flushed cheeks and a pounding heart. Never had she been so imprisoned in a parade before. She had never loved these sorts of events when the eyes of the world were upon her, but she had never felt so lost, never wanted so desperately to be anywhere else. Instead, she sat up straighter in her saddle and forced a smile back on her face. As people crushed in close for their blessings, she kept her hands lowered. She was stronger than this. Had she not stood up to brigands and Fang Zedong, she would not be waylaid by the cold looks in the people's eyes. She was a princess, and her magic was more powerful than most here could dream. The knowledge felt hollow.
Shang didn't have time for the parade. He'd risen before dawn, written his father back, asking if he'd come to the capital for visitation this week so they could discuss marriage arrangements, dressed, and readied himself for his trial. He should already be in the courtroom, waiting with Fen just in case the judge decided to start early. Instead, he'd slipped out of the academy grounds, past the palace gates, and climbed the steps to a covered portico outside a line of shops. The whole place was bustling, crowded to the gills with festival goers. Shang worked his way up another stairway to a balcony tea room. The owner was busy shooing away people who just wanted a good view and no tea, so Shang took a seat as close as he could get and set a few copper tangus on the table. A smiling girl in colorful robes came by with a tray of tea and set it before him. He poured himself a cup, but didn't drink it, only let it warm his cold hands. His eyes were glued to the shut gates, waiting for the moment they opened. He just wanted a glimpse of her. Was it foolish? Absolutely. Did he care? Not a whit. Even if he did, there wasn't anything he could do. Not when he needed the sight of her like he needed air. He wanted a lot more than just to look at her from afar, but that couldn't be helped. At last, the gates opened and the people's cry went up. Steps bounded up to the balcony, and even the owner's shouting couldn't deter bodies cramming against the railing for a better view. Shang was forced to stand and thanked the fathers for the view his height afforded. Most of the parade meant nothing to Shang. While children shrieked at the shooting columns of flame from the fire breathers, he kept his gaze focused on the gates, waiting. His eyes glazed over for the dragon dance. He'd seen it all many times before. Then, at last, the Emperor's guard came into view. Shang's heart quickened. The cheering throng doubled their volume as the royal litter became visible through the gates. He didn't care about the Queen and His Imperial Majesty, though. Leaning forward, he craned his neck, searching. There she was, looking breathlessly beautiful in her gown of white, and also very uncomfortable. Shang's lips tilted up at Meiling's tense posture on the horse, likely due in part to the headdress she wore. It was lovely and regal on her, but for all her royal elegance, she had such simple preferences. She smiled at the crowd, and it was almost believable. Shang's own smile slipped away, replaced by a cold anger that only increased when people began calling for blessings from the royal family, and Meiling was the only one who kept her hand lowered. "She's not cursed, you fools," he wanted to snarl. "A blessing from her is worth twice that of anyone else's." He would carry her secret to his grave, but this was the only reason he regretted it. They should know her. They should know her worth went far beyond her magic. She might die before anyone realized she was the best person among them. To think he might never have seen it himself. He saw it now. She was grace, beauty, goodness, indomitable fortitude, quiet strength, and so much more. Anyone who didn't see it was a blind fool. And though she was right before him, near enough he could call out to her, an ache built in his chest. Too soon, she rode out of sight, and the crowd swallowed her. That is going to have to be enough, Shang told himself as he gave up his spot and climbed back down the stairs to head to his trial.
Chapter 7. All she knew was that the trial was set to happen sometime after the parade and, presumably, before the feast tonight. When Meiling returned to her room after the parade, she called her maids to unfasten her headdress. 4 of them, dressed in their gauzy pink, bent over her and hunted for pins. She touched her face and her fingers came back powdery white. She wished she could wash it away for now. Could she? The maids could reapply it before tonight, surely. The last thing she needed was to attend the trial with a face painted beyond recognition. Shang's warning words not to intervene wafted through her mind, but she pushed them aside. Like she was going to stand aside and let him die. Her maids rearranged her hair much simpler at her request and promised to dress her up again before the feast. Their titters were unmistakably disapproving, but she ignored them as they wiped the paint off her face, revealing dry skin beneath the caking layers. She replaced the gaudy gold sash with a more muted blue one that matched the print on her robes. After enough fidgeting to make her go mad, She was finally presentable enough to leave. What if she was late? "Thank you," Meiling breathed as soon as she was ready, leaping up from the stool and whirling toward the door. "You are dismissed." In a flurry of silk, she hurried into the hallway and cast sideways glances at the extra guards flanking her doorway. They had not been there before the incident with the Evanescer months ago. She ought to take her maids with her, and they waited at attention next to the guards. She pursed her lips and shook her head, forcing another smile. "No need to follow." The maids bobbed, poorly concealed curiosity painted across their features. The guards made no reaction. Satisfied, Meiling turned and scampered down the hallway as quickly as she could. Servants and guards were everywhere outside her wing. Their eyes burned into her as she hurried to the nearest staircase and struggled to keep her steps small and dignified. They dared not challenge her, but their unspoken questions were almost audible. What could the cursed princess be doing now? Should she not be resting or preparing for the feast tonight? Meiling had far more important things to do. She had never been inside the courtroom before, but she knew where it was. When she slipped between complexes, she wished she'd brought a warmer shawl to ward off the cold. At last, with numb, shivering fingers, she entered the court complex. Guards greeted her at the carved red-painted doors to the main courtroom. When she reached for the handle, their spears crossed in front of her. She looked up, frowning.
"Court is in session, Highness."
The first guard responded carefully.
"It is not open to the public."
"Already started?" Her breath snagged in her lungs, and she shoved away the growing sense of panic in her breast. "I am aware," she said, lifting her chin. "I assume entering now would be disruptive."
"Indeed."
Meiling paused for a moment, quelling her frustration. She looked at the guard fully in the face, noted his unusually wide nose and mouth. "There is a balcony, correct? For viewers?"
"The trial is not open to viewers."
"This trial involves me. I may be called as a witness. As your princess, I ask you to lead me to the balcony." The guards exchanged glances, and then the closer one stepped away from the door.
"This way,"
he muttered. Hardly believing her luck, she followed him down the corridor to a side hallway. The sconces were not lit here, leaving it a small, dark corner of the palace. He paused before the nearest door and stood at attention.
"Here, Highness."
"Thank you." She didn't wait for the guard to retreat before turning the knob carefully. Her heart pounded as she pushed it open and was met by a staircase. The guard was gone when she poked back out the door before she closed it. Quiet as a mouse, she tiptoed up the wooden stairs, desperately careful to keep them from creaking. At the top was a railing that mostly concealed her. To her left was the viewing gallery. She ducked her head low as she slipped behind the railing and took a seat along the front row of benches. She poked her head over the top enough to peer down into the courtroom. Less than 10 people occupied the large space below her. She spotted Shang immediately, seated beside Fen, to the left of the judge. Someone stood to the right and read from a very long parchment in a language Meiling did not understand, but recognized as an ancient dialect used in some official or religious settings. It was said that their founding laws, some as old as the mountain behind the city, were written in this ancient dialect. At least that was the explanation Meiling received for why it was sometimes still in use today. The judge wore long, heavy purple robes edged in silver. He sat sternly on the dais overlooking the room. His long black beard trailed down the front of his robes and settled on the edge of the table. There was only a handful of people on the benches below, viewing the trial. Meiling lifted her elbows onto the ledge and settled her chin on them, hoping enough shadow shrouded her presence that no one would look up and see her. Her gaze strayed to where Shang sat, as though carved from stone. His face was utterly unreadable, his hands unmoving in his lap. Fen, on the other hand, fidgeted and readjusted her position. She scowled sourly next to Shang's mask of nonchalance. She leaned over and elbowed him softly, trying to say something. His head moved in an almost imperceptible shake, and she retreated. Her scowl deepened. The man droning on in the unfamiliar language set the first parchment down, took a swig of water, lifted the next parchment, and began reading aloud.
Hu Fen, shapeshifter. You are accused of treason against the crown of Junning Hai through neglect and incompetence on the first assignment of your career. If you are found guilty, you will be sentenced to death by hanging or beheading as the judge sees fit. Tang Shangdi, Ice Wielder, you are accused of treason against the crown of Junning Hai through neglect and incompetence.
Meiling's mind reeled in disbelief as the words hummed in her ears. Treason? Neglect? Incompetence? Even Fen could not possibly be guilty of such heavy charges. She wanted to be hopeful. If the charge was too severe, surely it was more likely that they would be acquitted. Right? There was no space for hope around the dread that sank to her toes like a rock in the ocean. She could hardly hear the following words around the buzzing of those first few. Treason, neglect, incompetence, hanging, beheading. She remained frozen as the man continued, but everything inside her raged like wildfire. Heat flooded each of her limbs, down into her fingers and toes and up to the tips of her ears. Her breath came in short, soft gasps.
Hu Fen, what do you plead against these charges laid before you?
Asked the judge, turning his deep-set eyes on her. Innocent, Fen snapped. The judge frowned at her but moved forward.
Tang Shangdi, what do you plead against these charges laid before you?
Shang looked up at the judge and said without expression,
Innocent. Proceed.
The judge waved his hand to the man, who sipped his water and reached for the next parchment. His hands fumbled with the paper, his cup clinking when he set it down. With each movement, her heart clenched tighter. She stole another glance back at Shang. He was looking straight at her, eyes wide. Meiling gasped and ducked her head beneath the railing. Had he seen her enter? How did he know where she hid? She pressed her cheek against the plastered wall of the railing, its coolness seeping into her skin as she clutched her hands to her chest and drew her knees close. Was he angry? She decided to wait until her breath calmed to poke her head over again. But as the man began reading aloud again, her breathing only grew more rapid. Her ears went hot at the mention of her name.
The assignment in question involves a secret mission to escort Princess Meiling, no magic, from the palace of Suguan to the fortress Liafugan.
The judge's voice boomed.
Hu Fen, do you affirm this?
Yes.
Tang Shangdi, do you affirm this?
I do. This went on for some while, setting the facts and particulars of their mission before the judge. Every few minutes, the judge asked Shang and Fen for their affirmations. As the minutes passed, Meiling's will to rise from her hiding place fled her. Instead, she listened with nausea to the proceedings beneath her.
Where did you first encounter the brigands claimed to be attempting a kidnapping of the Princess Meiling?
Claimed? The word made Meiling bristle until she was drawing breath between bared teeth. A small, unexpected hiss cut through the silence. She looked up toward the ceiling, where she thought it had come from, but there was nothing.
The village Wunghai,
Shang responded.
It was at the village Wunghai that you were first attacked by the brigands you claim worked for Feng Zerong, formerly mind magic wielder and apostate academy student?
Shh. This hiss happened again, but it seemed to come from the far wall. Meiling crawled forward to look, but there was no movement in the gold and silver woven tapestries hanging from the ceiling. She frowned.
It was,
came Shang's voice from below.
What magic abilities did these brigands possess?
Scuttling. That was the sound, like a crawling bug or a skittering rodent. Meiling looked the other way, furrowing her brow tightly. She should not be afraid of bugs, but if one startled her, it would give her place away, and she might not be allowed to return. She tried to ignore the sound and focus on the words wafting up to her ears. But she couldn't ignore it. It went quiet, only to sound again at random intervals, always from a different place than before. Each time, her indignation at the trial faded a little more, replaced by a heavy unease. The sound was familiar. Try as she might, however, she couldn't place it. The trial was over surprisingly quickly. Perhaps they only meant to establish a broad overview of the journey today. Even now, she dared not peek over the balcony to watch what happened as papers rustled and feet shuffled. It sounded like everyone was leaving. Still hunched too low to be seen, she half walked, half crawled to the staircase. She waited at the top for a minute, as the unintelligible murmurs slowly came to a crescendo after a door closed. Then, carefully, she crept part way down the stairs. She would need to wait a little longer before venturing out of her hiding place, in case people walked by the hallway as she exited. She tried not to grow impatient as the courtroom continued to hum softly with life. Her hands found the edges of her sash, and she wound and unwound it around each finger in turn. She pulled hard on the sash until her poor index finger swelled and darkened to red. As she released it, the color immediately faded. The door at the bottom of the staircase opened, and a dark figure stepped inside. Meiling scrambled to hide, but froze. Shang. Her hand stayed on the banister, her back arched away to flee, her sash still caught in her grip. She released the sash when Shang's black eyes fixed on hers from below. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Nothing but the softest gasp. He jerked his head, beckoning her to come down to the landing. She hesitated. He remained silent. Slowly, step by step, as her heart rate picked up, she descended the rest of the stairs until she stood on his level, looking up at him now in the narrow space. He propped one of his legs on the first stair and crossed his arms. When he spoke at long last, his voice was a whisper.
Please, do not watch these trials.
There was nothing warm in his posture, nothing warm in his words. She swallowed, too aware of the gallery's shadows that fell around them. With his eyes so intently on her, she found it hard to collect her thoughts into words, resulting in her saying the last thing she intended to, "Are you angry that I came?" Shang released a soft exhale and glanced back toward the door. He seemed to listen for a minute to whatever was outside, and then looked back at her.
I wish you would not come.
Which was not the same as being angry. Her tightly clasped hands relaxed enough to fall to her side. She turned her gaze down to the floor, to the edges of their opposite-colored robes. If I do not come, I will never know what happened. You know very well that no one will tell me. He tilted his head to one side, glancing away.
Please. It is...
He heaved a quiet sigh, and pain overtook his features.
It's disgraceful.
Several replies clambered at her lips. Do you think I care about what is disgraceful? It's not your fault that you are here. Disgraceful or not, I want to make sure you and Fen are tried fairly. Instead, she said, I want to watch. You said yourself that you do not want me intervening.
And this will provide ample temptation for you to intervene.
I only want to know what happens. If worst comes to worst. Meiling stopped, her own fear reflecting in Shang's eyes. She drew in a fortifying breath and continued. I do not want to be in the dark forever on this. If I do not see it now, I'll never know.
You do not need to know.
That's what everyone says, and I'm tired of it, she growled, louder than she intended. She gritted her teeth, her jaw going rigid. She stood up straighter and leveled a glare at him. You cannot stop me from coming. Shang blinked slowly, giving her time to realize the petulant tone infiltrating her words and manner. She scowled and looked down at her slippers peeking out from beneath her robes. Memories of this morning's parade and the woman's shrieks made her close her eyes, trying to shut out the words. They only grew louder.
You are free to do what you wish, Your Highness,
he said at last, his voice removed and impersonal.
I will not stop you.
The formality, the brusqueness, the dragon-blasted title. It was like a slap to the face. So when Shang uncrossed his arms and turned to leave, she'd had enough. In 2 steps, she cut him off, planting herself firmly in front of the door and fixed him with her sternest glare. His eyes slid from the door behind her down to her face. Maybe she was insane, but she could have sworn his gaze trailed to her mouth before coming back up. A muscle ticked in his neck.
Highness.
Her anger softened to a plea, her fists unclenching until she held out both hands toward him. Shang! Surely we needn't be so formal when it's just us. He closed his eyes, his chest expanding with a breath, as though he warred with himself.
It's better if we keep our distance.
No, it's not. Shang's brows rose, and she wasn't sure which of them was more surprised by her vehemence. But she meant it, and she wasn't about to take it back. Instead, she lifted her chin, daring him to challenge her. I have been to DU and back with you. You are one of the only people in the entire world who knows me. I have been in your mind. I know you, Shang. Emotion threatened to make her voice break, but she wasn't done. It is not better for you to be stoic with me. He studied her for a long, quiet minute. She didn't retreat from his scrutiny. She met it head on, and that was how she caught the subtle shift in his expression, a layer being shed. They were already close in the narrow space of the landing, but he seemed to lean almost imperceptibly closer.
Do you think I want to be stoic with you, Meiling?
He whispered, emphasizing her name in a way that sent thrill all the way to her toes. He took a full step closer, tilting his face down toward hers.
Do you think I want that?
The back of her head hit the door when she looked up at him. Her words came out a tinge breathless. Sometimes, I'm not sure what you want. His forearm landed on the wall above her head, coming near enough that they breathed the same air.
I don't think it would be a good idea for me to tell you what I want.
Blood pounded through her veins, yet somehow she managed to beam at him. I'm all ears. His lips parted as he stared down at her. Then, mutely, he shook his head. Shang,
you were the one who said it didn't matter what you wanted when there was no chance of you having it,
he said, clenching the hand above her head into a fist. And you were the one who made me tell you my secret dreams anyway.
We were never going to see each other again.
And this is so different? We're living on borrowed time as it is. I know Tserong is coming. Shang went rigid, every last shred of softness gone.
How do you know that?
So, maybe she shouldn't tell him about her eavesdropping last night. I spent a lot of time with him. I know it won't be long before he attacks again." Shang's jaw worked, his gaze fleeing from hers. His voice dropped.
"If he manages to get to Suguan, he will kill you. You know that, right? He won't take you captive. He will kill you. And he won't make it quick."
She studied his profile, her heart never once letting up its rapid pace. She knew what he said was true, of course, and yet, why are you telling me this?
"Because you are wasting your time with me and this trial. Don't you see that it's your life at risk here?"
She couldn't think when he fixed her with a look that intense. She lowered her gaze to his chest as it expanded and contracted. What she wasn't prepared for, however, was Shang cupping her face and lifting it back to his. His touch was there and gone in an instant, but the gentleness of it seared forever into her skin. She stared up at him, wide-eyed.
"Meiling,"
he whispered, almost pleaded.
"You need a plan to escape the city if it falls. That is where you should be spending your energy. Not on me, not on this trial. It means a great deal that you care, but don't let your sweetness be what gets you killed."
He thought she would run away while everyone else was slaughtered? Did he think so little of her? Meiling narrowed her brows at him, trying to decide which argument she wanted to hurl into his face. She wasn't about to just sit by while Zedong destroyed her home. Shang leveled an equally stubborn look back at her, apparently reading the thoughts swirling in her mind.
"I can go back to titles and formality if you want. Or you can put up with this version of me."
The version that believes you're the only one who fights and makes sacrifices?
"No,"
he growled, bringing his face close to hers, his teeth flashing.
"The version that cares about you and is sick and tired of watching people hurt you."
His words stunned her speechless. But he wasn't done.
"I have watched you be in exile among your own people for most of my life. I tolerated Fen's cruelty toward you for far too long, contributed to it, even though I saw what it did to you. My own anger and resentment blinded me, and I tried so hard not to care. But you didn't complain. You didn't break. You stayed strong, even though we treated you despicably."
Meiling's lips parted, emotion filling her dry throat. Tears prickled behind her eyes, and she fought to keep them at bay. Shang leaned even closer, resting his forehead on the door above hers, his lips hovering near her ear. His voice turned husky, but the anger didn't abate.
"I watched them take you, strike you, shove you to the ground. I saw what they did to you in Feng's fortress. Do you think I've forgotten what it was like to be shackled and restrained while I watched him lay his hands on you? I will never forget, Meiling."
Her lashes fluttered shut, a tear slipping free to slide down her cheek, and at some point she realized her hands weren't at her sides, but resting on his heaving chest.
"You've endured enough,"
he whispered.
"You've sacrificed enough. I know you, and if I stand by and allow it, you will bleed yourself dry for those who despise you. Junning Hai doesn't deserve more sacrifice from you. Junning Hai owes you its sacrifice."
He said this as if he wasn't the exact same way, as if he wasn't actively sacrificing his life to an empire's perverted sense of justice. "Sacrifice isn't about fairness," Meiling whispered back, her voice breaking as she swallowed. "If sacrifice was only left to those who deserved it, no one would do it. And where would we be then?"
"Meiling."
Maybe Junning Hai is worth sacrificing for, not because it has no grievous faults, but because there still is enough goodness to fight for. Maybe if we survive this war, we can make a difference. We can be the difference. He pressed in closer to her, his warmth a shroud around her. His voice was rough as he punctuated every syllable.
How many ways must I say this? Let me be clearer. I don't want you to die. Do you understand now?
It was hard to think with him so close, with his heart pounding beneath her palm. Did she understand what now? Of course he didn't want her to die. He would have to be a monster to want that, and Shang wasn't a monster.
I need to get to the academy for my assignment,
he said, without moving an inch.
If I stay much longer, I'm afraid I'll kiss you. And I don't need to give His Imperial Majesty more reason to kill me.
Meiling's eyes flew wide. What? Shang pushed back from her, and though his mouth twisted in a rueful smirk, the intensity in his irises never abated.
I can't use the Yan Zhao technique as an excuse anymore.
Excuse?
Do you require an escort, Highness?
What?
Do you need me to escort you to your next destination?
She shook her head to clear her mind of the sudden confusion that his blatant declaration brought. Only once she'd slid away from the door, backing herself against the staircase and wrapping one arm around her middle, did she realize she'd accidentally declined a few more minutes with him. It was just as well. Shang grasped the handle, but paused. It was hard to make out anything in the shadows but the outline of his black robes and his tied queue. He lifted his head, seemed to move it slightly in her direction.
Wait a minute after I am gone before leaving.
Then he flicked his wrist and extended his hand toward her. She stared in confusion at his palm until something caught the light. Ice. She hesitantly took the 2 frozen discs, even more confused. He twisted the knob and pulled open the door. Black robes fluttered behind him as he slipped out and shut it behind him. His gaze darted up to hers for a split second just before the door closed. In that tiny span of his attention, memories flooded her mind. Memories of a dark chamber, his arms around her and his mouth kissing hers like he'd longed for her those weeks they were apart. Memories of him holding her while she wept, drying her tears and whispering sweet, gentle things in her ear. Memories that belonged to lifetimes ago. He shut the door. The silence left behind in his wake swelled around her like a tidal wave, nearly swallowing her as she stumbled onto a seat on the stairs. She needed to stop being so affected by him. She needed to focus her mind on the problems of Zedong and this trial, not on a stupid, desperate hope he would stay a little longer and do exactly what he left to avoid. Instead, she had to sit here until her flaming cheeks cooled enough that their color wouldn't betray her. Oh. She lifted the twin discs of ice in her hands and discovered they fit almost perfectly to her cheeks. Shutting her eyes, she pressed them to her face and muttered, "Dragons curse you, Shang."
Chapter 8. Shang's heart didn't stop pounding for hours. He threw himself into instructing a group of 6th-year students on wielding their magic in battle and honing their intuition on when to use weapons instead of magic. It wasn't enough. He could still feel her, smell her, see the moment her face had split into that brilliant, beautiful smile in his mind's eye. This morning, it had been easier to try to convince himself of the lie that admiring her from afar would be enough for him, that he could easily deny himself of her, just like he'd denied himself of every good and pleasant thing his entire life. Watching her from a distance would never be enough, and the few moments she was near did nothing to satisfy his longing. It only increased it. "Fathers curse me," he muttered under his breath, then brought up his waxwood staff in a quick defensive maneuver against a student. "Again, but faster, harder."
Tonight was the one night a year Meiling's family ate together, just them. Still, she was expected to be as grandly arrayed as she would be for a full court feast. Her thoughts buzzed around her brain as she sat in a half-aware fog while her maids clucked and poked at her, applying careful paint to her face and reaffixing her headdress to her hair. 6 days, including today. Then Shang and Fen would be executed if they were not proved innocent. 6 days. By the time the sentence was passed, it would be too late. There would be no time to think or do anything. It was straight to the executioner after that. She ought to prepare herself for that probable outcome. She ought to prepare herself to see Shang's neck stretched out on the chopping block, taut and vulnerable. Her stomach heaved. She couldn't. She held herself together through her maid's ministrations, despite her hands going clammy and her chest clenching so tightly she could barely breathe. Before long, she found herself standing outside the feasting hall, followed by a dozen maids in pink and flanked by 2 guards. Such an arrangement was too conspicuous for Meiling's comfort. It drew attention and proclaimed the passage of a princess. She preferred to slip in and out of places unnoticed. The door opened for her, and her name was announced.
Princess Meiling!
Meiling entered the hall, leaving her maids to flutter away. It was not a very tall room, with dark beams lining the ceiling and corners. The floor was polished to such a sheen that it reflected the carved gold moagüe decorating the walls and inlaid into the ceiling beams. In the center of the room was a low table surrounded by colorful plush cushions and covered in bowls of steaming cuisine. Pa sat at the head of the table, cross-legged on a cushion. Ma sat next to him, and Yun was across from her. A smile broke out on Meiling's face, and she hurried to sit next to Ma like always, leaving the seat next to Yun open for Hao. As she sat, she immediately felt the change in Ma's demeanor. It was more of a sensing than observation, but Ma's warm smile faltered ever so slightly. Meiling's movement slowed in hesitation, and she uneasily settled herself on the cushion. Her eyes flicked up to Ma's, and Ma offered something meant to be an encouraging grin but considerably fell short. Meiling's mouth went dry, and her rumbling stomach twisted at the sight and smell of so much food.
Princess Hao!
All eyes turned as Hao entered while trying to control a wicked grin. Meiling's attention snagged on the dirty hems of her gown, and Hao had thought she could get away with it without notice. The girl needed a lesson or two on subtlety. A quick sidelong glance revealed Ma had noticed too. She said nothing except smile in a greeting. When Hao came to sit down, Yun shook his head.
You're dirty. Don't sit close to me.
Meiling looked down into her lap to hide her smile. It seemed only a few minutes later that a servant entered with an announcement. It must have been hours. The food was half-eaten and cold, and Meiling's belly fought the restraints of her sash. Her mouth hurt from smiling so much, and Hao had fallen over once or twice in laughter. A spilled bowl of roasted vegetables next to her cushion evidenced that. Pa made more jokes during the feast than all the year prior. Meiling's theory was that he saved them up for tonight as they occurred to him during the year. Once, he and Yun even got up to have a fire wielder's equivalent of an arm wrestling match. Pa won, of course, but Yun gave him a good challenge. Hao leaped up after they finished and demanded her turn, refusing to be left out of the competition. Ma did her best, clearly fighting the preoccupation of her mind. A few times, though, she did seem to be drawn into the evening fully. Those were the moments that her beautiful eyes would sparkle with an otherworldly light, the moments that she seemed utterly satisfied with life. One of those moments, when Ma was laughing and her eyes were shining, Meiling swore Pa did a double-take.
It is time for the lantern lighting,
the servant said. Meiling sighed and looked around the faces of her family and was relieved to see she was not the only one disappointed that the best part of the entire festival was already over. Tucking her chin and suffering to stand from her mat, she followed behind Yoon out of the feasting hall. Had he grown since she had left? He seemed taller, a little broader, too. Something jabbed into her waist. Without turning, Meiling rolled her eyes and braced herself against Hao's teasing pokes. "Shh," she chided. Only a giggle answered her. Guards lined the stretch of hallway until the double doors. Her heart beat faster as they approached, no one making a sound except Hao's clumsy shuffles. 2 guards bowed and opened the doors. A dark sky, lit by millions of stars above and thousands of lanterns below, met their eyes. Filing solemnly onto the large balcony with her family, Meiling situated herself slightly behind Hao and Yun. Better not to be in a prominent position. Even though this scene had unfolded before her countless times in her life, it never failed to steal her breath. They stood above silent crowds, illuminated by the floating lanterns they held. Salty sea wind swept with the winter chill, balm and cold together. On the balcony railing, one lantern was tethered. It was orange, painted with the designs of multicolored flaming dragons. Fire for her family. It was already lit, casting dancing shadows over the serious faces around her. Pa approached it. With 3 purposeful strides, he stood in front of it, his bulky shoulders almost entirely blocking it from Meiling's view.
"Good people of Junninghai!"
he bellowed. "May balance be restored by the new lights," Meiling whispered, joining her soft voice with the multitudes below and her family beside her. Pa released the lantern. It wafted high in the air, at first alone, then surrounded by lanterns as unique as each person forming the crowd. It was a beautiful scene. Cheers erupted. She found herself grinning, gaping with neck craned at the star-like lanterns filling the sky. Was that what the stars were? Lanterns hung in the sky, never burning out? Meiling tossed her smile to the one person of her family she knew appreciated this beauty to its fullest, and found Ma staring at her with tear-filled eyes. She froze, her smile vanishing. Ma immediately looked away. A thick lump formed in her throat. Beautiful as the lanterns were, dancing in the night sky, beautiful as the joyous music drifting up now as people began to dance, she could see none of it. Not around the dread tightening her lungs and threatening to cut off her breath. She was almost too terrified to imagine what Ma saw in that vision. One step behind another. Meiling slowly backed away from the scene, away from her family's distracted eyes, away from the people who would most likely be happy she was gone anyway. She turned and slipped silently out of the balcony, through the line of guards with cocked eyebrows. As soon as she reached a separate hallway, she pried off her headdress, stuffing it behind a curtain. This done, she heaved a sigh as her hair tumbled free around her face. She burst into a run. There should be no worries about someone seeing her. All the servants who could be spared would be watching the lantern lighting and dancing with merriment. So she ran down ornate halls, past windows full of lanterns glowing against midnight, her feet falling softly on woven rugs. Her breath came in gasps, but in a good way. The passages grew darker, lit only by sconces along the walls. Shadows fell. Krish, krish. What was that? She slowed, then stopped at the apex of 4 hallways. She knew where each led. The royal family's complex, the throne room, the main entry of the palace, and the feasting hall she had just come from. No sound met her ears. The only movement of shadows came from the flickering sconces. She peered down the half-lit abandoned hallways surrounding her, her brow wrinkling. She had probably only heard her own movements. Dignified this time, she walked through the hallway she selected. If there was one person who would not be at the lantern lighting, it was the person she desperately wanted to see. She tried not to let her eyes wander to the strange shadows on the ceiling, which seemed to make the Mwagwe come alive and battle in murky, dreamy movements near the trim. She tried to keep her eyes firmly fixed ahead, on her goal. Tried not to let the hair raise on the nape of her neck. Kersh, kersh. There it was again. Meiling spun, lifting one hand unconsciously to her lip. She bit hard. The silent walls betrayed nothing. No signs of life flickered beneath the closed, darkened doorways. Even the candlelight seemed to behave, taming the shadows. She was being ridiculous, right? This was only her tired, spooked mind inventing every manner of fear. But who could blame her? Ma had seen something in her vision, something that terrified her, and she hadn't told Meiling. It was night, too. Darkness could make cowards out of the bravest. She didn't want to turn her back on any direction, certain the moment she did, someone would leap out from behind a curtain and grab her. Irrational fear. She faced her destination again, but this time she walked faster than before. Meiling stopped again. "I know you're there," she hissed. Her voice echoed in the hallway, bouncing off Qilin horns on the ceiling and a tapestry woven in the design of lotuses. This time, the candles flickered faster, dangerously. "Stop hiding from me," she tried to growl, but it came out more like a squeak. Holding still and slowing her breathing, she waited. Her eyes darted over every inch of the passage. Despite her wild urge to whirl and ensure no one approached her from behind, she stayed where she was, listening. Ksh, shh. There it was again, scuttling, faint but distinct. Like in the courtroom. Was there a palace bug infestation? Cockroaches, perhaps? Bugs shouldn't make her so uneasy. Or was she even more skittish and afraid than she believed? She broke into a run. The scuttling grew louder, more insistent, dogging her footsteps. The louder the scuttling, the faster she ran. The faster she ran, the louder it grew. By the time she burst outside through a side door, ignoring the guards eyeing her oddly, she could hardly breathe around the exertion and the fear choking her. She ran into the night, blind to the sky full of lanterns. All she could see were the shadows hounding her. She raced down the colonnade and bridge that connected the palace complex to the academy. As she expected, it was only mostly abandoned. She calmed her pace and drew herself up like a princess, despite her sweaty, clinging garments and smearing makeup. Almost instantly, the shadows surrounding her receded. The scuttling stopped. Meiling choked on a cry of relief. What an embarrassing thing to run from nothing. And yet, she couldn't shake the strong notion she had been followed. "Zedong isn't here," she whispered to herself. "He's in Butagan. He's not here." She folded her hands into her sleeves like a demure little princess and walked along the training grounds, hugging close to the building she had no names for. While she did not know where many things were, she knew where the library resided. Redoubling her pace, she hurried and ignored a few white-clad students' sidelong glances. Could they tell in the dark who she was? If they could, they would not want her near them. She lowered her head, letting her hair fall into her face and shield her. The library was darker than she had expected. In the entire place, only one candle glowed. It flickered and bounced, illuminating a low desk topped with parchment, inkwells, trimmings, and the profile of a half-asleep, frowning face. "Feiyan!" Meiling breathed, closing the library door and hurrying forward. Feiyan jolted in surprise, whipping her head up. I'm awake! I'm awake! Her gaze cleared. Meiling? What are you doing here? Come to punch me awake at my studies? Meiling smiled, relieved beyond words at the sight of her friend. She slid onto the cushion next to Fei-Yen, crossing her legs and folding the embroidered edges of her robes over her feet. I wanted to see you and find out how you were doing. I know festivals are busy times for academy students, and I thought it was probably especially busy for you. She stopped, then quickly added, Of course, you must send me away if you are too busy to talk. I do not want to add to your strain or stress in any way. Fei-Yen chuckled and dropped her quill to the table. She turned, situating herself so she could lean her elbows back on the desk and fling her legs out straight. I dare not be too busy to talk to a princess. Meiling snorted. She leaned forward, propping her face up with an elbow planted on the wood. I thought you might miss the lantern lighting. Pfft, I've missed it every year. Favorite day ever. Yes, I heal all day, but the masters aren't there to hound me about anything, so I get to do whatever I want when the sun goes down. Meiling glanced at the textbook opened in front of her, the several stacked next to it. Studying was most definitely not Fei-Yen's idea of a jovial way to spend her free time. Exhaustion lined the healer's face, evident despite a saucy, crooked eyebrow. Since you asked, Fei-Yen continued, flopping one hand about in an odd gesture. Ever since we got back, I cannot think straight. My thoughts are fogged and jumbled. Makes this, she smacked the textbook, so much more difficult. I think my brain hasn't caught up to my body after getting back. Meiling sighed. Same. We're supposed to go about ordinary activities as if everything is ordinary. As if their entire home and way of living wasn't on the brink of collapse. It feels ridiculous. Fei-Yen agreed with surprising forthrightness. Fei-Yen didn't even know the extent of the ridiculousness. Meiling chewed her lip, debating whether to tell her what she knew. The healer's attention sharpened. What? Shang thinks Sarong is going to take the city. Meiling blurted in a quiet rush. Soon. And I have no idea what to do. Fei-Yen gave a sudden wince and pressed the heel of her hand to her temple. Fei-Yen? Are you all right? Just this Qilin-spawned headache. She squeezed her eyes shut. It comes and goes in waves. But have no fear, gentle princess. It'll fade. Meiling laid a careful hand on her friend's shoulder, concern drawing her brow into a tight knot. You need to rest. Let me send for a peppermint tonic and some ginger tea. That should help with. Fei-Yen was already shaking her head. I'm already behind as it is. And see, the headache is already abating. She flashed a lopsided, unconvincing grin. The healer was going to run herself into the ground if she didn't rest. But Meiling couldn't make Fei-Yen do anything she didn't want to do. Slowly, she got to her feet, trying to ignore the droop of her friend's shoulders and the heaviness of her head. I'll leave you, Meiling whispered. Drink the tonic when it arrives. And please, try to get some sleep. I'll sleep when I'm decapitated. Please sleep before then. Absolutely not. Fei-Yen. Fine. Maybe. And I'll drink whatever you send, so long as it doesn't taste disgusting. Do you like honey? Lots of it. Meiling's lips twisted up in a rueful smile. I'll make sure they put plenty of honey in. Fei-Yen tilted her head upward to peer at Meiling, still sprawled in her half-seated prop against the desk. Next time you get stabbed or shot with an arrow, come see me. She winked, but her eyelid was slow to raise again. Will do. She reached out and gripped Fei-Yen's hand tightly, giving it a squeeze. I'll see you again soon. Fei-Yen saluted her, a lazy half grin spreading across her face. Meiling hurried out of the library, but paused on the threshold. She glanced back to see Fei Yan's head fallen low against her chest. Asleep? Heart clenching in her chest, she left the room. Now that the lanterns were released, more students were returning to their dormitories. At least, the ones who wouldn't spend the rest of the night celebrating with their visiting families. Meiling folded her hands in her sleeves and bowed her head, slipping into the main hallway leading out of this building. She hoped few people recognized her. A familiar stride coming toward her, however, made her whip her head upward. Entering through the sliding door ahead was a tall form she knew better than her own face. Meiling's steps halted, her mouth going suddenly dry. Shang looked up. He froze just inside the doorway. A stray student glanced sidelong at him, and Shang stepped out of the way so he could slip outside.
Highness,
he sputtered, even more shocked than her. He cast a covert glance around to be sure they were alone, then dropped his voice.
Meiling.
Hello, Shang. Drawing his composure quickly around him, he crossed the distance between them and offered a short bow. Meiling's lips parted, an urge that he never bow to her on her tongue. But he stopped her with a polite,
May I escort you to your destination, Highness?
That's when she heard the soft footsteps coming up behind her. More students. Yes, thank you. She hoped it didn't sound as awkward in his ears as it did in hers. He held out his arm to her. He still wore the black robes of an academy master, but they did nothing to conceal the corded muscles of his biceps and forearm when she slid her hand into the crook of his elbow. Without asking where she was going, he drew her outside to a covered portico. On the other side of the railing were the pits for combat practicing, and this was one of the few times they were empty. A tantalizing thread of his masculine scent mingled with the cold night air. If she closed her eyes, she could almost paint an entirely different circumstance for their current situation. One where everything was right with the Empire, she wasn't cursed, and he wasn't condemned to die. A world where the distance between them didn't feel like hundreds of li. When they were far enough away from any prying eyes, Shang's muscles tightened beneath her fingers.
What are you doing?
He whispered, not harshly but with a tinge of urgency.
Where are your guards? Your maids?
I was only visiting Fei Yan. I don't like being followed by a parade.
Meiling.
No, she said firmly, pulling them both to a stop. Don't rebuke me about not being safe. Not right now. Please. A muscle rippled in his jaw, but he didn't argue. They kept walking, and Shang still didn't ask where he was taking her. In fact, it almost seemed intentional when he guided her away from the palace. What were you on your way to? Meiling asked, breaking the silence.
I was going to meet with my former advisor.
Oh, I didn't mean to take up your time. We can go back to...
It's fine.
I know, but...
Meiling,
he said, his mouth quirking.
I said it's fine. How was Fei Yan?
Meiling sighed. Not well. She's working too hard.
She's always been that way. Hasn't had much of a choice in the matter.
How many hours a day does she heal? Shang shrugged, guiding her around the back of the academy complexes until they walked down a vacant portico beside the gardens. These gardens weren't as expansive as the palaces, but it was still a beautiful shade of silver in the moonlight. Her fingers and toes were slowly freezing into useless icicles. She couldn't care less. Not when Shang's low, rhythmic voice was warm beside her.
Almost sunup to sundown, as far as I'm aware. She has her full academy course load on top of that.
It's wrong, Meiling gritted out between frozen lips. They'll work her to death like that.
Yes, they will,
Shang replied. He eyed her sidelong.
They would have done the same to you.
Meiling's gaze shot to meet his. She wasn't a healer. People didn't rely on her for their very lives. What do you mean? Shang stopped walking, turning toward her, his head tilted downward as she stared up at him. That dark, glittering gaze of his ensnared her like a rabbit in a trap.
Fang isn't the only person who would spell you to sleep and make you serve his purpose. The difference with him is that you fought it. Would you fight it here, Meiling? When it was your own people who needed you? Who enslaved you? No, you wouldn't. You would submit to the very same treatment.
Something cracked inside her. What? He sighed, his face softening as his voice lowered. His free hand reached up, his knuckles a feather-light touch beneath her chin.
Meiling, this isn't as simple as hero versus villain. Those labels are rarely made of truth, only perception. To those in Butagan who were displaced from this land, Fang is a hero. He gives them hope.
He lies to them.
Yes, but it's not all lies, is it? Neither is Junning High all truth or all good. If you think this empire wouldn't drain you dry, then look at Fei Yen. Look at what your own father risked protecting you. He didn't rashly choose to hide your magic.
His words were achingly gentle, a stark contrast to the passion with which he urged her earlier this afternoon to not watch his trials. He didn't want to hurt her. The words hurt anyway. She didn't want to think of her home this way. It was her home. She'd grown up here. I suppose that is what you learned? Meiling asked, trying to deflect the conversation away from her, away from the sensation of her gut rotting away inside her. From your preparation to be a military strategist? That corruption is everywhere?
Corruption and injustice, yes. Though I learned as much just from being the son of a general.
A general? Her interest sparked, and she was glad for the distraction. Her eyes widened suddenly. How did I not realize that you're former General Tan's son? Shang smiled, and the world tilted on its axis, just slightly.
You didn't know?
It wasn't as if you told me. His smile widened.
If only I shared a surname with my father and inherited his ice magic.
She didn't think, she just reacted, and that reaction was a playful whack against his arm. Don't tease me. I don't know many people. How was I supposed to make the connection? Shang was fully grinning now, and it was the most dazzling thing she'd ever seen. It gave her enough distraction to not be utterly mortified that she'd just hit him. Then he gave her another distraction. His arm wrapped around her waist, dragging her flush against him.
I'll tease you if I so please,
he replied as warmth flooded her.
You didn't tell me your father was the emperor, and yet It
is not the same, Meiling cried, smacking his chest with the side of her fist as she twisted to disentangle herself from him. You're intentionally provoking me. His grip only tightened, his pleasure radiating from his beaming face.
Of course I am. And I'll keep
Footsteps. Voices. They both went deathly quiet. Shang's arms were still around her, and her palm was upraised to whack him again. Their gazes locked, but it wasn't urgency in his dark gaze. If anything, it was amusement mingled with something else she couldn't name. We've got to hide, Meiling hissed, pushing against his chest.
Why?
His arms didn't loosen a fraction. Because, she gasped, growing more frantic as the voices grew louder, about to come around the bend ahead. We can't be caught like this! Let me go!
Why can't we be caught like this?
That was definitely amusement tugging at his lips. "Because I'm cursed? Your reputation will be ruined." At that, his eyes darkened, the amusement washing away as though from a tide.
You are not cursed.
"Everyone thinks I am, and if they see you with me, like this, they'll think you're cursed too." Stubbornness flexed in his jaw, and he only pulled her closer, sending her thoughts scattering with the wind.
Then let them see.
"Shang!" she pleaded, bouncing on the balls of her feet as shadows appeared at the bend ahead. She flung out the only argument that could possibly work against him. "My father will kill you if word gets back to him. It'll hurt your trial." Shang let out a long, growling sigh, but looked one way, then the other, as though searching for a place to hide. His eyes fixed on hers, sharp and bright. What did that look mean? She didn't have time to wonder. He scooped her up, ignoring her squeak of surprise, and set her on the railing overlooking the garden. "What are you doing?" she hissed, panicking as the first swish of white robes became visible around the corner.
"Hiding in plain sight,"
he growled back, eyes flashing as he closed the distance between them. He filled every inch of her vision as he bent over her and splayed one hand between her shoulder blades, pulling her against his chest. His back shielded her from the gazes of the students who came around the corner, chatting and laughing among themselves. This wasn't going to work. And even if it did, how was she supposed to think straight with him touching her, holding her so close that his familiar scent of a clear winter day filled her nostrils? How was she supposed to breathe? He caught the side of her jaw, lifting her face to his as he whispered,
"Pretend you're enjoying this fake kiss."
His lips grazed the corner of her mouth, so soft, barely there, as he positioned his hand to block the view of their mouths. So the students didn't see that he only nuzzled her face instead of actually kissing her. Her heart was a wild, thundering animal in her breast, but she was a bird soaring above the stars, a song twining with the disappearing lanterns. "I'm going to die," she thought, half deliriously, half miserably. Why didn't he just kiss her outright? Why didn't he say the words she dreamed hovered on his tongue? "Oh," one of the students blurted.
"Oh,"
the other one echoed.
"Sorry, brother. We'll go the other way."
And with that, they turned and hurried back the way they'd come, leaving Meiling where she was on the railing, her face hot as an oven, as Shang went still where he was, his slow smile curving against her cheek.
"And you didn't trust me,"
he teased. "They apologized to you," Meiling breathed, not a single muscle moving except the rise and fall of her chest for air. Shang's fingers flexed on her back as his smile grew.
"Of course. It's common courtesy not to interrupt another man having a moment, shall we say, with his darling."
His darling. The young men were gone, and there were no more sounds of approach. No voices, no footsteps. Just the peaceful burble of gently flowing water and the chirp of songbirds mingling with the distant noise of festival celebration. But Shang didn't move. He inhaled and exhaled slowly, his mouth dangerously close to hers. He didn't let go of her jaw or unwind his other arm from around her. Out of nowhere, the urge to cry barreled into Meiling. They were so close in this moment, and either of them could suddenly break. He could turn his head a mere inch and claim her lips. She could reach up, wrap her arms around his neck, and pull him closer. They were so close. And yet it was like they were further away than they'd been when he was at Liafugan and she at Sedong's fortress. The world was falling to pieces around them, and in this moment it seemed like there was nothing they could do to prevent complete and utter disaster. She just wanted to lay her head against his chest and believe everything would turn out fine. But she couldn't. It was too obvious a lie for even her hopeful heart to fall for. She swallowed hard to keep the tears from falling.
I should take you back,
Shang whispered, his exhale a caress against her cheek.
We don't want the palace in an uproar because no one can find you.
No, we don't, Meiling replied stupidly, shakily. As though hearing the unshed tears in her voice, Shang drew back slightly, tilting her chin up so he could run his eyes over every inch of her face, as though reading each thought she tried so hard to hide from him. His fingers brushed a strand of beads hanging from her hair.
I'm not going to tell you lies when you know as well as I that High is in dire straits. I will tell you this, however. You might not be my charge anymore, but I will spend the rest of my days working to ensure your safety and your happiness. Understand?
She nodded, and the welling tears slipped free, sliding in twin trails down her cheeks. His brow creased, and he bent down toward her again, softening his voice even more as he whispered,
Hey, it's all right. Come here.
He pulled her against his chest as he'd done once before, and she clung to his robes as she wept quietly. Once upon a time, she'd wanted nothing but to be alone, to be left with her own mind and her own thoughts, and to escape the constant pressures and anxiety she experienced around other people. But now she didn't want to go back to her lonely room. She didn't want the company of her own mind. She wanted to stay here, with him.
Do you want to tell me what is on your mind?
Shang asked. When she first met him months ago, with his icy demeanor and cold streak of ruthlessness, she would never have dreamed him capable of this softness. Part of her wondered if he hadn't been capable of it then. She shook her head wordlessly. How could she explain to him what she wanted? It wouldn't be fair to either of them to speak such things aloud. So, she tried to ignore his strong arms around her, the steady beat of his heart, and focused instead on composing herself. He held her tightly while she sniffled and hiccuped, and didn't pull back until she'd been quiet for several minutes.
Ready?
She nodded, shivering in the cold as he released her before offering his arm to escort her back to the palace. They said nothing more as the frosty night wind whipped around them. Shang led her back the way they'd come, walking her over the bridge to the palace complex. She didn't know if she slowed her steps the closer they got to the warm yellow lanterns hanging outside one of the palace's side entrances, or if it was him. It didn't matter, because they still reached their destination too quickly. Shang handed her off to the guards, and with a deep bow said,
Good night, Highness.
She didn't have a chance to reply before he was gone.